That morning, as I poured coffee, my daughter-in-law looked up from her phone and said coldly, "It's time you moved out." My hands didn't shake. I'd built that house with my own two of them. So while she was at work, I called my realtor and made a quiet decision that would change everything. They thought they were pushing me out, but they had no idea what I still owned, legally and emotionally. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. The morning light slipped through the blinds, soft and golden, spreading across the kitchen tiles like it didn't know it was about to witness something cruel. I had set the table as I always did, 2 plates, 2 mugs, and 1 for myself, though I hadn't been hungry for weeks. The smell of coffee filled the air. Kendrick sat scrolling through his phone, and Vera, my daughter-in-law, had that perfect stillness of someone who liked control. When I set down her eggs, she didn't look up. She took a sip of her green juice and said it, flat, polished, like reading from a script. "It's time you moved out." The spoon in my hand slipped, clinking against the plate. The sound stretched through the room like a crack in glass. I didn't speak at first. The clock ticked behind me, counting down the seconds between my old life and whatever this new one was supposed to be. Steam rose from the coffee, curling like smoke over a fire that had long gone out. I finally asked, softly, "Oh, you're making plans already?" My voice trembled just once, then steadied. Vera smiled without warmth. "You'll love it. It's peaceful." Kendrick said nothing. He just stared at the countertop, pretending the world had lost its sound. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one where his father used to sit, where his laughter once filled the mornings. Now, a tall modern stool had replaced it, sleek, cold, uninviting. I hadn't picked it. After breakfast, I gathered the dishes like nothing had changed. In the laundry room, the quiet was heavy. On the wall hung our family calendar, neatly written with everyone's names: Kendrick's shifts, Vera's Pilates, the dog's grooming. But under Mom, a red line crossed it out. Beside it, someone had written in smaller letters, "Guest room, available." My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I took my phone from my apron pocket and snapped a photo. The click of the camera sounded louder than it should have. I didn't know why I did it then, only that something inside whispered, "Keep proof." Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed. The morning sun reached my feet. I opened the old metal lockbox, the one Kendrick never bothered to ask about. Inside were files, neatly labeled in my handwriting: mortgage, deed, taxes, repairs. I had built this house with every overtime shift after my husband died, brick by brick, receipt by receipt. I ran my hand over the papers, feeling the faint roughness of time. "You want me to move out?" I said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "But this roof has my fingerprints on every nail." When Kendrick left for work, Vera stayed behind. She hovered at the counter, tapping her nails against her phone. "We'll start showing you some options," she said lightly, as if offering me tea. I looked up from the table and met her eyes. "You might want to check who owns the house first." Her face didn't move. She grabbed her purse and walked out, her perfume trailing behind like a warning. The kitchen went still again. Every plate, every spoon, every curtain I'd chosen now felt foreign. But I wasn't leaving, not the way she thought. That morning, I stopped being the guest they wanted gone. I became the witness they never saw coming. The next morning carried that same pale Texas light, slanting through the curtains of my bedroom. It touched the metal lockbox on my dresser, the same one I'd opened the day before. I slid it toward me and unlatched it carefully, the hinges creaking like an old secret waking up. Inside lay my life in papers, the deed, the mortgage payoff, insurance statements, and tax receipts, all neatly filed in my handwriting. Every page bore my name, embossed and certain. I traced the address printed on the deed, the raised letters pressing against my fingertip like a quiet pulse. For a moment, I heard my late husband's voice again. "This ground will always be yours. Indy, don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." His promise still held, stronger than the walls his son and daughter-in-law thought they owned. I stacked the papers gently, each one a piece of my invisible armor. My defense would not be loud, it would be thorough. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and control. On the counter, next to my coffee mug, lay a glossy brochure, Cypress Gardens, Senior Living. A yellow sticky note fluttered on the cover. In Vera's looping handwriting, "You'll love it here. Peaceful. Low maintenance." Peaceful. That word again. I studied the brochure under the overhead light, the edges crisp and new. The smiling faces of silver-haired strangers stared back from manicured lawns. I lifted my phone, took a picture of the note beside the clock on the stove, the date clear in the corner of the screen, my second piece of proof. Then I smiled to myself. Small but sure. Low maintenance, I thought. They have no idea how much maintenance it takes to erase someone like me. At 10:30. I called Seraphine. She'd been my friend for nearly 30 years, the only person I trusted with silence. She answered on the second ring, her voice low and knowing. "Indy," she said. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, choosing my words. "I'm thinking of having this place evaluated, quietly." And there was a pause on the line. "Quietly," she repeated, her tone soft but sharp. That word usually means you've been wronged. "Let's just say," I replied, "it's time I check what's truly mine." We didn't need more words. She promised to stop by later in the week. No signs, no real estate car, just a friendly visit for tea. I hung up, exhaling for the first time that morning. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Vera had handed me exile disguised as courtesy. The sunlight landed on the placemat before me, and I took a pen from my cardigan pocket. On a small notepad, I wrote 4 words: keep, donate, record, prepare. Each word was a line between what they thought I was and who I had always been. I folded the paper once, slipped it under a ceramic coaster, and pressed down. It wasn't just a list, it was a vow in plain sight. The day stretched on quietly. When Kendrick returned home that evening, I heard their voices through the half-open door. Vera was saying something about possible senior options, and he answered with distracted murmurs. He didn't ask what I thought. He didn't notice the hum beneath the calm, the sound of pages turning, locks clicking, plans forming. In my room, the lamp glowed softly. I reopened the lockbox, slipped a fresh sheet of paper inside, and began a new note. They will never see it coming. Outside. Sugarland was calm, the perfect picture of suburban peace. But in this house, peace had changed hands. That night, while they slept, I drew the first quiet line between their world and mine. The Texas sun poured through the cafe windows, warm and sharp, catching the steam from my coffee cup. Seraphine sat across from me, her nails tapping lightly on the table, a rhythm that used to calm me when life felt uncertain. Now it felt like a drumbeat, leading me somewhere new. "I need this done quietly," I told her, my voice even, under my name. No listings, no signs, no gossip. She tilted her head, measuring my tone. "You've thought this through." "For 2 sleepless nights," I replied. "If they want me gone, I'll go, on my own terms." Seraphine nodded once. From her briefcase, she drew out a simple document. Confidential Evaluation Agreement. It was a modest piece of paper, nothing dramatic, but I felt my heartbeat steady as I signed my name. For the first time in months, I felt the ground shift under my control. "Give me 2 days," she said, tucking the paper away. "You'll have an appraisal. No one needs to know." That afternoon, a silver sedan rolled up the driveway. The man who stepped out wore khakis and carried a measuring device. "Property appraisal," he said cheerfully, handing me a clipboard. I nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Of course. The kitchen's just through here. While he measured the rooms, I busied myself rearranging the pantry, pretending this was just another spring cleaning. Every cabinet door opened, every sound carefully timed so it seemed natural. When he reached the back porch, he smiled. "It's a solid house, ma'am. Market's good right now." I smiled faintly. "It's held up longer than most things." When the door closed behind him, the quiet in the house felt different. It wasn't the silence of being dismissed. It was the silence of movement, of something finally underway. By evening, Seraphine emailed me the report. I printed it out on my old inkjet printer, each page curling slightly from the heat. Estimated sale, $890,000. Cash offer possible. I stared at the number, stunned. That wasn't just value. It was vindication. I placed the paper beside a framed photo of my late husband. His smile in the picture looked almost approving. "I'm still protecting what's ours," I whispered. "Even now." The next morning, a beige sedan pulled into the driveway. A middle-aged couple stepped out, Elaine and Martin. They were polite, quiet, the kind of people who notice small things. Elaine paused by the peach tree near the mailbox. "It's lovely," she said. "How long has it been here?" 30 years, I told her. "My husband planted it the spring before he passed. It blooms early. Can't wait for permission." She smiled, brushing a petal from her sleeve. "We're looking for a home with a story. Something lived in, not staged." I looked at her, the way her fingers rested gently on the tree bark. "Then you're standing in one." They toured the house slowly, asking about the tiles, the light, the view from the kitchen window. I answered each question honestly. No embellishments, no apologies. By the time they left, I could see it in their eyes. They understood the soul of the place. That afternoon, Seraphine's email arrived again. "Buyer interested. Cash ready. Offer forthcoming." I printed the agreement, folded it into an envelope, and sealed it with care. The air in the room turned golden as the late sun filtered through the blinds, touching the metal handle of my filing cabinet. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I slid the envelope into the drawer and closed it softly. For a moment, I stood there, letting the warmth rest on my hands. They thought I was leaving because they told me to, but I was leaving because I chose to. Friday morning, sunlight spilled across the oak table my husband built decades ago, every scratch and stain a story of breakfasts, birthdays, and late-night coffee. Vera unrolled a glossy set of blueprints across it like a dealer laying out cards. "Home office here," she said, tapping the paper with a sleek pencil. "And this area becomes a rental suite. Great passive income." Kendrick hovered beside her, arms crossed, nodding as if this were all routine. I traced my finger down the page until it stopped at a red mark labeled "Demolish." The word looked almost cheerful, printed in blue ink and optimism. "Whose signature?" I asked quietly. "Goes on the permit line that says owner?" Silence fell so fast you could hear the refrigerator hum. Vera's hand froze. Kendrick looked down, pretending to check his phone. I smiled, polite but cold. "Just curious." They didn't answer. They didn't have to. The table between us said enough. That afternoon, a knock at the door interrupted the calm. A man in a construction vest held a clipboard. "Morning, folks. Contractor here to measure for your remodel." Vera ushered him in, her voice sugary. "Come on in. It'll just take a minute." The man stepped toward the kitchen, but I met him halfway. "Before you measure anything, may I see the written owner authorization?" He blinked, taken aback. "I've got a text confirmation," he said, flipping through his phone. I shook my head gently. "That's not a legal document. You'll need my signature for that." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He glanced at Vera, then back at me. "I'll, return when the owner signs." He turned and left, the door clicking softly behind him. Vera's smile fell. Kendrick mumbled something about miscommunication. "No," I said evenly, wiping the counter. "Just correction." By 3 o'clock, I sat at my desk, uploading photos from my phone, the brochure from the retirement home, the blueprints on the table, the contractor's business card, all cataloged neatly. I attached them to an email addressed to myself, subject line, owner authorization. "Silence is not surrender," I whispered, hitting send. "It's structure." Saturday morning, the mail arrived early. Among the bills and catalogs sat a crisp envelope from the HOA Architectural Review Committee. I opened it carefully, unfolded the letter. Application incomplete. Missing owner authorization. Resubmit with owner's signature. The words glowed like quiet justice. I placed the letter on the kitchen table and waited. When Vera read it, color drained from her face. "It's just a clerical thing," she said quickly. "It's a boundary thing," I corrected. At noon, she tried to recover her footing. "We'll fix it Monday," she said to Kendrick, who half nodded, eyes on the floor. I gathered the blueprints, rolled them neatly, and handed them back to her. "You'll need the owner's signature to bring that back in." She took the roll tightly, jaw set, the table cleared, mine again. That night, I wrote 2 columns on a yellow notepad: what they control, schedules, noise, social posts, assumptions; what I control, deed, permits, access, evidence, choice. I underlined the last word twice. Then I opened the lockbox and took out the trust folder, the one I hadn't signed yet. The lamplight touched its edges like a promise. I looked toward the dark kitchen doorway, now silent, steady, almost reverent. By Monday, I would sign not just papers, but the line dividing what they wanted from what I would allow. Monday morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Mr. Zyoid, Coulson's office, settling on stacks of manila folders and a brass desk lamp that hummed faintly. I sat across from him, hands folded neatly on my lap. He had been my husband's attorney for 30 years, the man who'd handled every title, every signature that built our lives. "So," he began, adjusting his glasses, "you'd like to establish a new living trust?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "Primary beneficiary, myself. Contingent, my granddaughter, Leora Matthews." He looked up sharply. "Not your son?" I smiled faintly. "I'm protecting peace, not punishing anyone." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You remind me of your husband, quiet, but decisive." Paper slid across the desk. The soft click of my pen felt like a lock turning. Each signature redefined ownership, not as property, but as boundaries reclaimed. By 10:45, it was done. At noon, I drove to the First State Bank, the same branch where my husband had once walked me through our first mortgage payment. The teller, a young woman with perfect hair and polite nervousness, smiled as I approached. "I'm here to verify a trust account," I said, passing her my ID. She typed for a moment, then frowned. There was an online request last night to link your account to a joint login, but it was blocked by verification." My fingers rested lightly on the counter. Blocked? Yes. Ma'am, our system flagged it as unauthorized. We declined it automatically. I see. She handed me a form. You can sign a privacy hold to prevent any future access attempts. The pen didn't tremble in my hand. I signed cleanly. They tried to log in, I thought. Not knock. At 2 o'clock, I met Seraphine at a small cafe terrace near the courthouse. She wore her realtor's badge on a silver chain and her usual half smile that meant she already knew things. The buyer's escrow is ready, she said. They move faster than most people half your age. Age, I said, stirring my coffee. Just means I've already learned the cost of hesitation. She laughed softly. Then you're right on schedule. By 5 o'clock, I was home, scanning documents into a new encrypted folder labeled Living Trust Indirum. Each file clicked into place: deed, trust agreement, notarized affidavit. Every motion was deliberate, calm, efficient, final. I wrote in my planner, trust finalized, May 8th, 11:17 a.m. At 8:15 p.m., the phone rang. Kendrick's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Mom, he began cautiously. Vera said you were at the bank. Are you making changes? The question lingered, as though he were still trying to sound like a concerned son. Everything's in order, I said gently. Don't worry about it. He hesitated. I just want to make sure you're okay. I am, I replied. Good night, son. The click of disconnection felt like the quiet closing of a door I'd left open too long. Later that night, I sat at my dressing table, the lamplight soft on the stack of folders beside me. I took out one envelope and slipped in a single sheet of paper, a note for Leora. Someday, you'll understand why silence can be protection. I folded it neatly, placed it back with the trust, and turned off the light. The radio played faintly in the next room, a soft old jazz tune that made the house feel peaceful again, mine again. By the time they learned the house was under contract, every paper had already been signed in my name alone. The morning began like any other, quiet, almost kind. I was in the kitchen, the steam from my tea curling into soft shapes, when I heard the screen door creak open. Vera was outside, humming to herself as she watered her little pots of mint and thyme. Then, the sound stopped. The hose dropped with a slap on the brick walkway. Her voice, sharp and cutting, shattered the calm. Is this a joke? I looked up from my teacup. No, I said, my tone level. It's not. Through the window, the new under-contract sign gleamed in the Texas sunlight, planted neatly in the front yard, just beyond her herbs. Vera's face turned pale. You can't just, she started, her breath quickening. But the rest of her sentence dissolved into the kind of silence that holds both disbelief and fury. I lifted my cup again, calm as porcelain. You told me it was time to move out, I reminded her. So I did what needed to be done. By the time Kendrick came down, still in his work shirt, the kitchen was charged with air so tense you could almost see it. He held up his phone, voice half panicked. Vera says you sold the house? I did, I replied. But we live here. His voice cracked. For now, I said simply. He blinked, as though he'd heard wrong. Behind him, Vera paced, slamming drawers as though noise could undo the truth. Mom, how could you, without telling us? I looked at him evenly. You didn't ask when you told me to leave. Why should I ask now? The words fell heavy, not shouted, just factual. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the sound of 2 generations realizing the same thing at once. Control had changed hands. I reached for a folder on the counter and opened it slowly. The faint rustle of paper filled the space where their voices had failed. This, I said, sliding the escrow letter across the table, is the closing timeline. You'll have 3 weeks to pack. Vera's jaw tightened. You're kicking us out. No, I said softly. I'm just moving forward, like you wanted me to. For the first time since that breakfast weeks ago, her eyes flickered, not with anger, but fear. She turned away, muttering something about lawyers and unfair. Kendrick sank into a chair, his hands buried in his hair. I could see his shoulders shaking, but no sound came out. When I sat beside him, he didn't look at me. I remembered the day he helped me hang that welcome home sign after his father's funeral. I still had it somewhere in a box. I kept that sign, I said gently. Not the guilt. He lifted his head slowly, eyes wet. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I know, I said. That's why I had to. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Around noon, the house filled with the tapping of Vera's phone. Her voice echoed down the hallway, brittle with rage. Imagine being thrown out by your mother-in-law at 60, she said to no one in particular. Her words meant for everyone online. I didn't respond. Instead, I stepped outside, where the sunlight hit the under contract sign just right, and took a quiet photo of it. Truth doesn't shout, I thought. It documents. By evening, the house had fallen into a tense kind of stillness. Vera stayed in the guest room, hers for now. Kendrick sat in the living room, eyes on the blank television screen. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls I had painted, the curtains I had hemmed, the floors I had polished after midnight shifts years ago. Every inch carried my husband's laughter, my son's footsteps, my labor. In the living room, under the soft lamplight, I whispered, I gave this house life. Now I'm giving it peace. I packed my trust folder into a small suitcase and placed it beside the front door. The air was heavy, but not cruel. It was the weight of something finishing. By 9 o'clock, the house was quiet enough to hear the ceiling fan turning. Their silence was louder than any argument. And that night, I realized something simple. Silence ends when someone leaves first. By sunrise, I had already decided it would be me. The morning light came through my curtains like a whisper, soft and forgiving. I sat on the edge of my bed, a half-open box at my feet, and folded my late husband's shirts one by one. The scent of cedar lingered from the drawer where they had rested for years. Each fold felt like a conversation we never finished. I laid the shirts in neat stacks inside a bag marked Donate, then reached for a smaller box labeled Memory. Inside it, I placed a framed photo from our first anniversary and the watch he used to wind every Sunday morning. When the last box was sealed, I wrote 3 words on each. Keep, donate, memory. I paused, staring at my handwriting. What I take with me, I whispered, doesn't fit in boxes. At 10 o'clock, a white van from Helping Hands of Fort Bend pulled up the driveway. The driver, a polite young man, stepped out with a clipboard. Mrs. Matthews' donation pickup? Yes, I said, handing him the keys to the storage room. Everything on the right side. Across the street, Miss Dorsey from next door waved. I smiled back. To anyone watching, it probably looked like a simple downsizing, a widow tidying her life. Let them think that. Upstairs, I could see Vera's silhouette behind the blinds, stiff and still. The curtain shifted as if she wanted to look but couldn't bear to. When the van drove away, I stood in the empty garage and exhaled. I'm not leaving, I murmured. I'm unburdening. Around noon, Kendrick called. Mom, can we talk? Just lunch, please. I agreed. The diner was nearly empty, the kind of place where the waitress knows every regular by name. Kendrick arrived late, face drawn tight. Vera said the realtor called. He blurted, Is it true? The house is already sold? I nodded. The papers are done. He stared at me. You should have told me. I stirred my coffee, eyes steady on the cup. You told me to move out, I said quietly. I just followed directions. He rubbed his forehead, his voice breaking. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. I know, I said. But words have homes too, Kendrick. They stay where you leave them. He looked down, shame settling on his shoulders. For the first time in months, I saw the boy he used to be, not the man trying to defend a wife, but a son who'd forgotten his mother was still standing. When we parted, he didn't hug me. He just said, "I'll call you later," and walked away. Back home, the kitchen smelled faintly of lilies. I sat at the table and wrote a short note, my handwriting slow, deliberate. Thank you for reminding me what ownership means. The title was in my name, but the piece, I had to reclaim that myself. I folded it once, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it beneath the vase of white lilies, their petals already beginning to fall. By evening, the house was half empty. The echoes of footsteps followed me as I walked through each room. The living room where we celebrated birthdays, the hallway where Kendrick learned to walk, the kitchen that had heard every kind of silence. You kept me safe, I whispered to the walls. Now it's your turn to hold someone else. In the front yard, the under-contract sign stood firm in the orange glow of sunset. I touched the wooden post lightly, the way I used to touch Kendrick's shoulder when he was small. At 9, I loaded the last suitcase into my car. The neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. As I drove past the house, a new sticker had been added across the sign, bold red letters spelling "sold." It glowed in my rearview mirror as I turned the corner. This isn't the end, I said softly. It's delivery. The radio played a slow piano melody. My hands, steady on the wheel, caught the rhythm easily, as if the road ahead had been waiting for me all along. By Friday morning, I would no longer wake up under that roof, but for the first time in years, I'd wake up free. The air in Brenham smelled different, softer somehow, touched with magnolia and rain. I pulled into the gravel drive at 10 in the morning and turned off the engine. My new home waited in front of me, a small blue-gray cottage with white shutters, quiet under a wide Texas sky. I stood there for a moment, my keys in hand, feeling both foreign and familiar. When the lock clicked open, I whispered, "Not moving out, just moving forward." The house smelled faintly of paint and lemon oil. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors. I set down my one suitcase and the tin box of documents, my paper trail, my proof, my piece. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, as though I'd been holding my breath for months. By noon, I was in the kitchen, boiling water in the same dented kettle I had carried through every chapter of my life. The whistle rose gently, filling the silence like an old friend. I poured the tea into a chipped mug and leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise through lace curtains. "I used to make tea for everyone," I murmured. "Now I make it for peace." Outside, the magnolia trees trembled lightly in the wind. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, stillness that belonged only to me. The next morning, I walked down the gravel path to the mailbox. Inside was a plain white envelope, postmarked from Sugarland. My name written in careful cursive. I opened it right there by the gate. "Dear Miss Mary G. Matthews," it read. We could feel the warmth in every room. "Thank you for leaving the home in such grace. It already feels loved." It was signed, Elaine and Martin. I smiled, folding the letter neatly. "They heard what wasn't said," I whispered. That afternoon, my phone buzzed, Kendrick's name lit the screen. I hesitated, then answered, "Mom." His voice was quiet, heavy. "I didn't realize how much you'd done for us." I listened to the sound of wind on his end, the kind that carries regret. "You'll understand," I said gently, "when you build your own peace." There was a long pause, then the faintest sigh, the kind that means an apology too fragile for words. "I love you," he said finally. "I know," I replied, and meant it. That evening, I sat on the small swing in the backyard. The fairy lights glowed softly above me, and fireflies drifted through the dusk. I looked up at the stars, remembering my husband's voice from years ago. "Build, don't beg." I did, I said aloud, smiling into the night. On Sunday morning, I woke before sunrise. The world was quiet. No footsteps in the hall, no tension humming under the walls, just the gentle hum of freedom. At the small table by the window, I opened my laptop. The document for my trust blinked on the screen. I typed in a new line, "Current residence, permanent." Then I closed it, pressed save, and looked outside to the patch of garden soil waiting to be turned. "Roots," I said softly, "don't always mean staying in one place." The magnolia petals fluttered in the early light as if agreeing. The past had lost its grip, but forgiveness, that would be my final act of ownership. The courier arrived just after sunrise. I was on the porch watering the small pots of rosemary I'd planted, still wearing my old housecoat. He handed me a thick envelope with my name written in a familiar hand, Kendrick's, careful and uneven, the way he used to sign his spelling tests. I sat down on the swing, the envelope heavy on my lap. Inside was a letter, not an email, not a text, but ink on paper. "Mom," it began, "I know I failed you. I took the easy side because silence felt safer than standing up to her. I didn't mean to erase you from your own home." He wrote that he'd seen the sign come down and the movers arrive. He wrote that Vera was angry. But deep down, he knew the truth, that I had every right to act. "If you'll let me, I'd like to come talk. Just me." I held the paper between my fingers, feeling the indentations of his pen strokes. It wasn't an apology I could frame, but it was the first that carried weight. I folded it neatly and placed it inside my file folder marked "Personal." By mid-morning, my laptop pinged with a message from Seraphine. Attached was a notarized affidavit, dates of appraisal, escrow, and sale authorization, all signed by her and witnessed. I printed it and slid it into a plastic sleeve. The smell of fresh ink filled the cottage. I wrote one line on the back of the document, "Truth lives on paper longer than it ever does online." Then I signed the receipt and scanned it into my files. When I looked at the stack, Kendrick's letter, Seraphine's affidavit, the HOA notice from weeks earlier, I realized my piece had become its own archive. Not rage, not revenge, just record. At noon, I met Kendrick at a cafe halfway between Brenham and Sugarland. He was already there, elbows on the table, looking smaller than I remembered. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking halfway through the word. "I thought I was protecting my family." I stirred my tea slowly. "You were protecting convenience," I said. He nodded, staring into his coffee. The hum of lunchtime conversations filled the space around us. Gentle but impersonal. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "It didn't go anywhere. I didn't take it." I answered. For the first time in months, he smiled, faint, tired, real. We agreed to talk without Vera present. No mediators, no justifications, just truth uncluttered by noise. Later that afternoon, while we sat in his parked car outside the cafe, his phone buzzed with notifications. He frowned, scrolling. Vera had posted on the neighborhood app, painting me as cruel and manipulative. I waited, saying nothing. Then another email came through, an automated HOA message. He opened it, and the words appeared in blue on the screen. Application denied for lack of owner authorization. He froze. The truth sat there in plain text, time-stamped and undeniable. I reached into my bag and handed him Seraphine's affidavit. "You see," I said softly, "I didn't have to win an argument. I just had to stop being one." He exhaled, shoulders sinking. "She won't believe it." "She doesn't have to," I replied. "Belief isn't ownership." By evening, we walked through a small park near the cafe. The sun cast long shadows over the grass. I told him my boundaries like clauses in a contract. No posts about me, no visits without asking first, no questions about finances. He nodded after each one, voice low, almost reverent. "I understand." Then I added, "One clause for hope, lunch once a month, just us." He smiled faintly. "That I can do." When I returned to the cottage that night, I placed Kendrick's letter behind Seraphine's affidavit and the HOA reply, organizing them carefully in chronological order. I lit a small candle on my desk and wrote in my journal, "Peace is a document I sign daily." The candle flickered once, then steadied. I blew it out, leaving only the faint scent of wax and lavender. By midweek, the closing packet would arrive, and with it, the last morning I would ever ask to spend inside that house. The air was cool when I arrived, pale light spilling over the porch railings like a whisper. I entered the code the buyers had sent me, the keypad beeping softly before the latch released. The door swung open as if it had been waiting for me. The scent hit first, lemon oil and cedar, faint but familiar. I stepped inside slowly, each movement deliberate, a ceremony of memory. The house didn't resist me. It breathed around me. I laid the escrow envelope on the entry table where I'd once kept family mail, the final exchange resting in plain sight. It felt almost like a handshake between the past and what would come next. In the hallway, the light shifted from gold to silver. I walked toward the living room and ran my fingers along the wall, the same spot where I'd marked Kendrick's height when he was 10. The pencil lines had faded, but I knew where they were. A small scuff beneath the banister caught my eye. Vera's suitcase had scraped it once during the move-in. "Funny. The things that survive people," I whispered. "You kept our secrets," and took a few photos, just corners, light, shadow. No faces, no ghosts. I wasn't reopening anything. I was closing carefully, like sealing a letter. The kitchen greeted me next. The oak table gleamed in morning light, cleared of plans, cleared of argument. I set my teacup down in its center, just as I used to each morning before the world turned sharp. On the counter lay the packet Seraphine's courier had left, the final walk-through acknowledgement. I signed each page slowly, initials steady, the pen gliding without hesitation. Beside the final line, I wrote the date and whispered, "I am leaving, not being removed." Paper turned intention into truth. In the guest room closet, I found a slim portfolio wedged behind a stack of folded blankets. Inside, a piece of thick paper, my granddaughter Leora's crayon drawing. Me, on the porch, holding a pie in one hand and a cat that never existed in the other. Above it, in bright pink letters, she'd written Grandma's house. My breath caught. I sat on the floor and smiled through tears that didn't need to fall. I slipped the drawing into a craft envelope labeled, "To Leora. Open at 18, inside." I tucked a note. "Sweetheart, dignity is the key that always fits. Keep it close." Then I added a copy of the trust addendum, her name, the cottage address. the reminder that peace could be inherited too. The latch clicked behind me sometime after 8:30. I froze, then heard footsteps in the foyer. Kendrick stood there, winded, eyes unsure. He didn't cross the threshold until I nodded. "I won't ask you to stay," he said. "I'm not leaving you," I answered softly. "Just the house." He looked around, seeing the emptiness, maybe feeling the weight of what we'd built. From his jacket pocket, he took out a small tin box, the one from his father's old toolbox. Inside were a few spare screws, tarnished and familiar. "I found these," he said quietly. I took the tin and held it like a medal. "Then you know how things hold together," I told him. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The silence did what words couldn't. When the clock on the wall reached 11, I walked to the door. 3 keys rested on a blue ceramic dish, one labeled front, one back, and one forever. The last was ceremonial, a key from our first lock, useless now but heavy with meaning. I adjusted the dish so the keys caught the sunlight just right. I placed Leora's envelope and the tin of screws inside my bag, smoothed the runner on the floor, and turned toward the door. The handle felt cool against my palm. I pulled it gently closed until I heard the soft click, not final, just certain. It sounded almost like a benediction. By afternoon, the signatures would travel faster than memory, scattering across screens and servers. But what I carried, the drawing, the keys, the quiet, was proof that I had lived here and left on my own terms. Morning sunlight spread across the kitchen counter like a soft quilt. The kettle whistled once, sharp then fading, as I poured hot water over the same brand of tea I used to drink in Sugarland. Somehow it tasted lighter here, maybe because it no longer carried echoes. Silence used to frighten me. It used to sound like judgment, like the pause before another correction, another reminder that I was too sensitive. But now, it felt like space. It let me hear the small sounds I had missed before, the clock ticking against the wall, the rustle of magnolia leaves outside, the sigh of the floorboards settling with morning warmth. I drank my tea slowly, eyes lingering on the blue shutters I'd painted myself. This was what peace looked like. Not grand, not loud, but quietly complete. At 10, the gravel on my driveway crunched under tires. I peered through the window. A silver car idled, sunlight bouncing off the hood. Then I saw her. Vera stepped out, wearing a pale blouse and sunglasses that didn't belong to this country quiet. She clutched a white envelope in both hands. For a second, I thought she might leave it in the mailbox and drive away. Instead, she walked halfway up the path and stopped. "It's from Kendrick," she said, voice tight. "He couldn't come." I nodded once, neither inviting nor rejecting. The door stayed open just a few inches, enough for civility, not for entry. Vera looked down, thumb brushing the edge of the envelope. "He said," she hesitated, "he said you deserve peace." I held out my hand. She placed the envelope carefully, as if it might burn. For a moment, our fingers almost touched. Then she stepped back, turned toward the car, and drove away. The dust from her tires hung in the air longer than the moment itself. I sat on the porch bench, the envelope resting in my lap. My name, written in Kendrick's familiar hand, curved like a memory. It wasn't sealed. I could have opened it right there and let the words spill into the morning air. But something inside me refused. I turned it over once, then again. I could imagine what was inside. An apology shaped like regret. Maybe a few words written for his wife's sake. I didn't need to read it to know what it cost him to send it. Instead, I slid the letter beneath the thick book sitting beside me. Simple estates and trusts. The cover pressed down lightly on the paper, a soft weight of completion. Closure doesn't always require reading the last page, I whispered. The sun was higher now, bright against the wooden porch rail. I moved to the garden, still damp from last night's rain. The soil smelled rich, ready. I knelt down and pressed wildflower seeds into the earth, one handful at a time. Every ending deserves something that grows, I said quietly. My hands sank into the dirt, grounding me. It wasn't grief that filled me anymore. It was something steadier, older, almost like gratitude. By afternoon, I washed my hands and went inside. The phone rang just as I set down my gloves. "Seraphine," I greeted, already smiling. "Funds cleared," she said. "Escrow's officially closed. Congratulations. You're free." "I always was," I replied, and meant it. When the call ended, the house hummed with a soft, invisible rhythm, one of completion. The light through the window shifted from gold to amber as dusk began to gather. I sat by the window, the envelope still lying under the book on the side table. Fireflies blinked outside, brief sparks in the dim. I folded my hands in my lap, palms warm from the day's work. Peace wasn't something anyone could hand me. It was something I built, quietly, one choice at a time. The letter would stay unopened. Some things are stronger when left unsaid. And just when I believed silence had said all it could, I realized it had finally become home. Saturday came wrapped in clean light and the smell of vanilla. I whisked batter in my small Brenham kitchen, the skillet warming the way it always had, steady and sure. A soft knock sounded, then Ellie's grin filled the doorway, gap-toothed and bright. Kendrick waited by the curb, giving us space like we'd agreed. "Today is about pancakes and stories," I told her, "not houses and signatures." She nodded solemnly and climbed onto the stool, elbows tucked, ready to listen and to grow. We flipped the first pancake together, my hand guiding hers on the handle. The edges crisped, tiny bubbles winking and then breaking. A little drumbeat of ordinary joy. I slid the golden circle onto her plate and pressed a pat of butter into a quick river. Here, in this quiet kitchen, love needed no permission slip. A house could be sold, a home could be practiced. When we sat at the table, I set down a small tin of screws, dulled by years of Tom's pockets, and a note card in my handwriting, flour-streaked and caught with a faint grease thumbprint. "These build things," I said, tapping the tin. "This tells you where to start." "Pancakes?" she guessed. "Pancakes," I smiled, "and patience." The sealed trust letter for her 18th birthday stayed in my desk. This was the inheritance of now, the kind a child can carry and use without breaking. She tucked the tin into her jacket as if it were treasure, which it was. Later. I took my tea to the porch swing while Ellie explored the magnolia shade. The phone rang, bright and pleasant. "Ms. Matthews?" a woman asked, voice warm. "Brenham Public Library. We're delighted to confirm the Reading Garden grant. Name on the plaque, Thomas Matthews Corner, Bill Don't Beg. Are we spelling that correctly?" "You are," I said, smiling into the air. We settled on a modest bench, weatherproof lights, a low fence, and soil turned for community hands. After the call, I wrote the words on a notepad anyway, just to see them twice. Money can move walls, I thought, but love plants roots. By late morning, a text chimed from Kendrick with a link. Vera's name sat above a neighborhood post, not sharpened like before, but leveled, the way a screwdriver evens a hinge. She wrote that I'd had full legal authority to sell, that the HOA had denied her earlier application for lack of owner authorization, that any speculation had been unhelpful and unkind. The HOA followed with a note of thanks for the clarification. I didn't answer. I took a screenshot from my records and let the air out of my lungs in one long, unknotted line. Vindication is lighter when you're not carrying it to show anyone. We met at the park near the library site for a picnic. Kendrick spread the blanket while Ellie set the plates like small targets of cheer. No apologies today. We'd said enough of those in letters and careful pauses. He washed berries at the fountain and listened while Ellie described the screws as coins that make things. I reviewed our monthly lunch clause as if it were nothing more than scheduling, which in truth is how forgiveness survives. He nodded, not grateful, not punished, simply present. We talked about school projects and seed packets. The past stayed in its folder, where it belonged. In the late afternoon, we walked the perimeter of the empty lot behind the library. Staked flags flapped like quiet promises. I pressed a packet of wildflower seeds into the soil and coaxed Ellie to do the same. "Grandpa liked things that worked," she said. "He did," I replied. "And things that lasted." The streetlights blinked on as day thinned to silver. I touched the bench stakes, a small benediction of hands to metal. Dusk found me back at the cottage. The lamp clicked on. The room breathed. I placed 3 papers in my ledger: Seraphine's affidavit of dates and signatures, the HOA notice denying unauthorized plans, and a screenshot of Vera's retraction, not trophies, tools. I labeled the folder House, completed, and slid it into the cabinet beside Trust Active. The words looked ordinary. That's the nicest thing peace ever is. Ellie came to the doorway with the tin in her fist. "When I use these," she asked, "what should I build first?" "Breakfast," I said. And she laughed because she'd learned me well. "Then shelves for your books. Then a birdhouse that lets every small thing come and go." Kendrick lifted his keys. A quiet question. I squeezed his shoulder. A quiet answer. They left in a wash of headlights and gravel, and the night closed softly around the cottage like a shawl. I lit a candle and opened my journal. The flame fluttered, then steadied, and my pen did the same. I wrote the day in small, true words: pancakes, plaque, post, seeds, and folded my feelings between them the way batter folds wheat and milk. When I finished, I looked toward the window. The glass held a reflection of a woman who did not win an argument but did finish a promise. At the end, I stacked the ledger, the journal, and Ellie's recipe card, and I listened to the room answer with its familiar hush. Peace is the home I own, wherever I stand. It is not a deed or a password. It is the key I keep inside my palm, warm from use, never needing to turn a lock again. When I look back, I realize this story was never about losing a house. It was about finding myself. Sometimes, peace isn't what we're given. It's what we decide to keep. I learned that silence, when chosen with strength, becomes the loudest statement of all. To those of you watching, especially the mothers, fathers, and grandparents out there, remember this: dignity doesn't live in walls or deeds. It lives in how we stand when the world tries to move us. Maybe you've faced moments when you were told to step aside or start over. I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to rebuild, to protect your worth, and to plant new roots, no matter your age. Now I'd love to hear from you. Has there ever been a time when you had to take back your peace? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Maybe Texas like me, or somewhere far away but close in heart. If this story touched you, press the number 1 in the comments, or share what part spoke to you most. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful lessons.